Hello, in today's tutorial we're going to create this very simple space rock. But in order for us to do this, we're going to have to use two applications, not just Blender, but also Photoshop. Now, if you're not a Photoshop person, don't worry, I have a solution which I'll explain to you later. We're going to use Photoshop to create a brush, which we're then going to take into Blender, and then we're going to use that brush in sculpting and sculpt on those details that we can see on this rock. Now, I appreciate not everybody has Photoshop. It is rather expensive and very complicated. You may not know how to use Photoshop. No problem. If you don't have Photoshop, then please do skip to a later part of this video where I start talking about creating brushes, because I will be offering these brushes on my Gumroad page. See the description for the link. Anyway, to Photoshop. This isn't a Photoshop tutorial as such. We're just using it as a way of creating the brush that we need. So I am going to be rather quick in Photoshop. I'm going to be heavily depending on quick keys, so please do listen up and take notes. So I've been to Pixabay and I've downloaded this rather nice rock texture. This is going to be the basis for our brush, which we're then going to use to sculpt space rock type detail onto our model. I will start by clicking on the new layer icon at the layers palette. If you can't see the layers palette, go to Window and make sure that it's clicked there. So if I click on New, I'm going to create a raised area first, just to give an explanation to how this works. We're going to be dealing with displacement. So creating a brush and bringing it into sculpting in Blender, you're effectively creating an image which will then displace parts of your geometry of your model. Just to give you an idea of what that means, anything which is going to be black within the image, so if I just paint a bit of black here, for instance, that will be a depression in the geometry. Anything which is white, like that, is going to be an extrusion, something which is going to come up. So to give you a good idea of how that would look, if I wanted to create a deep depression with a mountain in the center of it, I'd probably create something like this. Imagine that's a dried up lake. And in the center of that lake, there is a very tall island. So that's pretty much how displacement works. Now, if I just undo that, we're going to use a very similar approach when creating craters. Let's start by generating a very simple crater. Best way of doing that is using the brush tool, making sure that it's on opacity 100%. Right click, make sure the hardness is on 0. I'd set the size at something like perhaps around about the 1100 mark or 1200. And then using white on your new layer, not on your detail layer, click maybe a couple of times. So you get something like that. So just imagine this has displacement now. We have a bumpy background or of this rock, and then you have like this conical going upward. Or perhaps it'll appear more like a blister, if you like, or a bubble. So when you actually look at craters, you can see that there is a raised area, and then it just scoops out. I believe that one's in Arizona. It's not on the moon, it's not on the space rock. There we go, that's probably more appropriate. See the raised area around the edges, and then it's scooped out. So going back to our image, we have the raised area. We now need to make a scooped out area. And I'm just going to click on the color chip here. By the way, if you don't know how to use the color chip, if it's a funny color to begin with, just click up here and that resets then to black and white. So making sure that black is your top color. I'm going to bring my brush size down a little. Maybe I'll try 800 or something like that. Actually, I'm going to go increase the hardness 50%. And then I'll decrease the size down to 400 pixels. And then I'll just click in the center here. So in theory, we should have something like that now inside our crater. I don't think this looks very realistic though, so I could do a few other things just to give it a little variation. If I go over here to the Blur tool, Sharpen tool, Smudge tool, choosing the Smudge tool, right click, choose a Smudge tool, bring that down a little, use the parenthesis keys or the bracket keys on your keyboard to do so. And then putting the strength at, say, around about 30%, just going to nudge those edges just a little, just to add a little bit of variation. maybe a bit bigger, and this time I'm going to go the opposite way, but not right to the edge. Good, so there's our first crater. Now, one thing you may have noticed, and I'm sure there are some viewers out there which have already picked up on this, the background actually has color information in it at the moment. It's not quite ready anyway for using as a displacement brush. So what I will do is click on the background layer, my rock layer that I've imported in, Control U for U and saturation, believe it or not, U for uniform, go to saturation and bring that down to -100. Click on OK. So now that's black and white. It's very coarse, so we need to soften this a little. It's going to look terrible as a brush if we leave it as it is. So with that layer selected, I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'll put it at something like 10. That will probably do it. So we've got a bit of variation, a bit of movement, a bit of noise, a bit of bump if you like, but it's not too heavily detailed. Now, before I go any further, there's a little error that I've made here. I've noticed that my image is currently set at 8-bit. 16-bit is better. If I go to Image, Mode, and just change that to 16-bit, the image now has a greater depth of grey from black to white in it. You see here there's a bit of banding going on. I don't know if you can see that on your screens, and that's because it's an 8-bit. I've turned it over to a 16-bit, but I need to perhaps blur this area now. So if I just go to Blur, Radial Blur, clicking on Best, on Zoom, and just push that out a certain way, it will get rid of the banding and at the same time just soften everything. That, to me, looks like a crater now in displacement form. I think we're getting somewhere. What I will do, though, is I'm going to duplicate this layer because I'm going to dot it around this canvas so that every time I apply this brush in sculpting, it'll create several craters at once. So if I just duplicate that with a Control-J, so selecting your crater layer, Control-J, Control-T to transform, and then just shrink that down, holding the Shift key down. Maybe I'll rotate it as well, and just drop it wherever you want. And maybe I'll duplicate that and place it here, making it slightly smaller. Maybe rotating it, duplicate it again, rotate it, make it slightly smaller, and again. I think that will do. I think also the background layer, it needs pushing back a little. At the moment, I think there are too many peaks and troughs. So if I go to Control-L after selecting that layer, and then bringing the output levels in on the black and on the white, just so it becomes a little grayer and smudgier. So we end up with something looking like that. I'm also going to duplicate that layer and drag it right to the top of the layer stack, and then I'll bring the opacity right down to maybe something like 30-odd%, just so it adds a little bit of detail inside the craters, but not too much. So you see the before and the after. Now, before we go any further, one thing I like to do, it's not totally necessary, but create a new layer at the very top of the layer stack, and then with the eyedropper, choose a fairly neutral, darkish color. Using the paintbrush, you can also use the Alt key, by the way, when using the paintbrush to call up the eyedropper. With a fairly soft brush, I like to just paint around the edges, just on the off chance that we end up with a harsh edge to the brush, which we don't really want. So just not going too close to the edge, we end up with something like that. Now that we've created the brush, we're going to save it. Now, I would suggest saving it as a PNG. I'd press Control, Alt, and S, go to where you need to save the brush, choose PNG, and save it, like that. So once you've saved it, I would suggest going back through this image. Don't just close it and be done with it. I would take this and make a few new variations of these craters. You can do so by, if I was just to hide those two layers there, and then just select these layers using the Move tool up here. Maybe I'd take this one, just shift it down here, click on this one, move it over here, maybe bring that one over there, this one up there, this one across there, this one over there, and this one right next to that one. Maybe I'll duplicate this one as well, make a couple of new ones, duplicate that one. Then bring those two layers back on, and then save it again. And then repeat. Now, as I said, these are going to be available on my Gumroad page. If you're unable to create these yourself, then please do visit the link in the description. And for a very, very, very modest fee, you can download those and start using them for this tutorial. So now that we've created our brushes, if I just go over to here, you can see there are actually, well, that's one I created a lot earlier. There are 3 here, which are Space Rock 1, Space Rock 2, Space Rock 3. We're going to be using those in Blender now in Sculpt. Before we do anything, let's just set Blender up so that we can generate random rocks. We do this by going to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and we need to type in Extra, there it is, Extra Objects. Now mine's already enabled as you see, but just put a tick into that. When you go to your 3D viewport in object mode and you press Shift A to add, you'll notice under meshes, we have rock generator. So if I just click on that, you see here, I usually like to add a few in. You can play around with all of these settings, but if I add a number of these in, I just move these apart, just clicking on them and then just pressing G and clicking again. I get to see what I've got. So maybe I could go through one of those and think, yeah, that's the one for me. So maybe I keep on getting drawn to this one here. If I just put that over there and select these and press X, delete, and I'll put this into the center here. So this is going to be the basis for my space rock. If we actually have a look at that mesh-wise, you could see there's not a lot going on. If we go over to the modifiers tab, you can see there's loads of things that feature has generated. If I just apply all of these, I've got a really nice little add-on which allows you to apply all. But if you haven't, then just click on apply for each one of them like this. I'm just going to click on apply. So there we have our rock without any modifiers. However, I'm going to remesh it. I want it to be fairly high resolution. You can either remesh it or subdivide the surface. It's up to you. I think maybe today I'll go for subdivision. Why not? And I'll boost this up a little, maybe to something like 5. And then I'll apply that subdivision modifier. So you can see the mesh is very, very detailed. A lot of squares, a lot of geometry. Now going over to sculpting. And don't forget, at this point, this is where your computer starts to slow down. It's a good idea just to Control S and save. If I just zoom in, I always like to change the viewport here a little. Can you see it over here where you've got the various view states? You click on this drop down and onto here. There you go. That just looks nicer, doesn't it? I think I might get rid of some of these sharp edges here. I quite like this tool here, the Scrape Fill. I'd bring that down using my parenthesis keys and just drag a little over it just to scrape out anything which looks a little unnatural. Yeah, I think that'll do. Right, now for the magic part. Right, so going down here, I've got the various brushes available. I'm going to start by clicking on this one here and then right-clicking and duplicate. And I'll give it a name. Click on Save. And as you can see, it's just dumped it here. That's fine. Going over here to the Tool tab within the Properties window, there's a few things I'll need to set. Firstly, let's open up Texture. We're going to click on New. And then, see this little gizmo here? If we just click on that, it'll take us to the Texture tab. We then click on Open. And we navigate to where our brushes are kept. We choose the brush that we want to use and click on Open. So we should have something like this appearing. Now, if I was to click and drag now, you can see we get this effect. So it is actually using the brush. If I just did single clicks, we'll have something like this appear. So you can see it's working. That's great. And if I increase the strength, you really get to see it in action. But it's not doing what we really want it to do. We can't vary the size of it. We can't vary the angle, it's just looking pretty ugly and useless. That's okay. I'm just going to undo this a little. Before we can really use this for sculpting, there are a few settings here we're going to have to change. So let's start by going back to the Tool tab on the Properties palette, and then expanding Advanced under Brush Settings. Now we need to change from Blob to Draw. And if we scroll down, under Modes we have Stroke. Let's just expand that, and we'll change Space to Anchored. Now when we click and drag, you can rotate, you can change the scale, and it's no longer just dragging a stream of data through it. Obviously the strength is way too high, so if I just undo that and then go back up here, change the strength, we can now see that we're getting the effect that we're after. Let's refine our brush by going over to our brush in the library and right-clicking and choosing Edit Preview Image, and then clicking on the actual image itself so that it gives us a preview so we know what we're dealing with. Once you've done that, I recommend right-clicking and clicking on Save Changes to Asset. I can then duplicate it by right-clicking and clicking on Duplicate Asset. Give it another name. So with the new duplicate brush selected, I need to come over here, click on the Texture tab within the Properties window, and I need to duplicate here. And then come down here, click on the X, and then select my second brush. Again, I'm going to right-click on here, Edit Preview Image, select the brush itself, and there we have the brush. Right-click, Save Changes to Asset. I'll repeat that one more time. So there we have 3 brushes. Now up here in search, if I just type in Creator, just to clear all of the others so we can see that easily, I can select between the 3, adding lots of variation. Maybe I want to change the strength a little on some of these. And one thing I like to do is sometimes I'll create a large area like that, but also dot it with smaller craters, just every now and then, just to give it a little more of a random feel. If you do something and you don't like the looks of it, you can always go over to here, let's get rid of that, go over to the Smooth tool and just smooth it out, and then go back over to the craters and add some more back in. There we have it, a fully sculpted meteor, space rock, whatever you want to call it. Go into Viewport Shading Material Preview. We see we don't actually have a material at the moment. Of course, it will look a lot better with a texture, so I'm just going to drag one of my textures onto this. Perhaps I'll bundle that up along with the brushes on my Gumroad page if you wish to use this particular shader. Might just change the colors a little just to make it look nicer. Do find yourself a decent rock texture from wherever. I recommend registering with Blender Kit if you haven't already done so, and downloading one of their decent rock textures. I think I've generated about 3,000 of them and put them on there, so there's plenty to choose from. Let's see how that looks in cycles. Wow, that's looking pretty good. Yeah, that will do. I could always go over it a bit more with adding a few more craters if I wanted it to look like it's been hanging around space for a very long time. But you can see that was a fairly easy space rock to generate. And also pretty realistic. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial today. It is only a quick one and a little rough and ready. I didn't script it. So if you have enjoyed it, don't forget to like it, don't forget to share, subscribe as well, and please do engage with me in the comments. I'd love to chat with you. Over and out.